The key event of this election campaign so far has been Rishi Sunak leaving D-Day commemorations early. He did it to sit down for a pre-recorded interview with ITV. And 6 days later, that interview is now being released. This is how it started.
Prime Minister.
Gosh, hello.
Good to see you.
Very nice to see you. Hey, sorry to
I'm
have
well,
kept
thanks
you.
No, not at all. I know you've been in Normandy.
Yeah, it all just ran over. It was
course.
incredible, but it just ran over everything.
I'm sure it was
so apologies for keeping you.
No, not at all. I'm sure it was a powerful trip. I mean, so pertinent as well this year, considering what's happened in Ukraine.
Yeah, which I haven't seen President Biden's remarks, but I think that's kind of the echo, I think, what he said.
Did you get to meet any of the veterans, or were you...
Oh, no,
did you just
lots.
have to do the ceremonial?
Lots, over yesterday and today.
Yeah,
I've already spoke to almost everyone that was there, I hope.
So he said, apologies, it ran over. So while the rest of Britain is outraged, Sunak left the event early. He, in fact, thought he'd been kept rather late. And the interview didn't get much better for Sunak.
When you are wealthier than the king, what do you do day to day to make sure you're still in touch with the kind of struggles ordinary people face? Have you ever gone without something?
Yeah, I mean, my family emigrated here with very little. And that's how I was raised. I was raised with the values of hard work.
What did you go without as a child?
We went out with lots of things, right? Because my parents wanted to put everything into our education, and that was a priority.
So what sort of things had to be sacrificed?
Lots of things, right?
Can you give me an example?
All sorts of things. Like lots of people, there'll be all sorts of things that I would have wanted as a kid that I couldn't have, right? Famously, Sky TV.
Okay.
So that was something that we never had growing up, actually. But it was lots of things. But again, that's my experience is obviously going to be what my experience was, what is more important in my values and how I was raised. And I was raised in a household where hard work was really important. You had to work very hard, and family was important. Service to your community was important.
Lots of things, actually. We had to give up lots of things. No, there was Versace jeans that I was never bought. There's all sorts of sacrifices. Sky TV is what he goes for now. A very small proportion of the public at the time that he's talking about had Sky TV. It's not really struggling. Credit there, though, too, I think, Paul Brand, because what I found very frustrating in this conversation, a separate conversation but related, about the VAT that the Labour Party is going to levy on private schools, is I keep hearing people... So I was on Storm Huntley's show, which is the one after Jeremy Vine on Channel 5 yesterday, and they had this rugby player. I was very jealous of his he looked amazing, very jealous of his physique. But I wasn't that impressed by some of his points, because he was sort of saying, like my parents sent me to private school, but they worked really hard. We didn't even go on holiday. And like, as a host, you should say, really? You didn't go on holiday? Like, did you go on holiday? Did you go on one holiday in this up? Because I think when posh people sort of say this, they gave up holidays. What they mean is that someone else in their class was rich enough to go to both the Maldives and, skiing in the Alps every summer, and their family could only do one of those things every summer, right? So I like that Paul Brand was like, be specific. What did you have to give up? And the only thing he could think of was a skybox. Of course, I think if you're very wealthy and everyone knows you're very wealthy, you should just be honest about that and say, look, I know that I'm from a privileged background, and I won't have struggled in the way that many people in the country are struggling right now. I'm not going to pretend anything other than that. But I think you can see from my actions that hasn't, influenced how I've governed, right? That would have been a good answer. But Rishi Sunak is a terrible, terrible politician. Grace, did you have a skybox growing up?
I did. I'm going to have to take your advice, Michael, and just own up to my poshness, which I don't think anyone is particularly surprised about. What I think is really funny about this interview is that he has no idea the way that he's coming across. And like, I totally get this, because I know so many of these types. And this obviously is, I was like upper middle class, like well off, whatever. When you go to Oxford, for example, you meet people who have, like Rishi Sunak, been to public schools, like, for example, Eton, and then come to Oxford, and literally live on another planet and have never really met or engaged with people outside of their very small social clique. And their entire lives and their entire identities are built around their status within this very small social clique. So to them, it often does feel as though they have had to sacrifice a lot, or they've had to give things up. Because for Rishi Sunak, he could have spent all this time becoming a multi billionaire, or, doing other things that would have potentially given him more success than what he's had as prime minister. And I just think it is really funny that he is still very much in that headspace of kind of just not being aware of how different his life and his experiences are to the vast majority of people in the UK. And it's so obvious. What's interesting is that there are lots of other politicians, aren't as wealthy as Rishi Sunak, but potentially had much kind of posher upbringings, who are fantastic at this sort of thing. Farage, for example, he's so good at, like creating false links with the average person. Trump as well, he's extraordinarily rich, and yet he's able to stand up as though he's this kind of authentic representative of the working class. I think what's interesting about both of those characters is just their shamelessness. Like, they will never give in to the idea that they should feel in any way less or ashamed because of their upbringing, or indeed anything else about their personalities. And in doing so, they're kind of, I think, almost speaking for the people who feel like they shouldn't have to feel ashamed for, I don't know, saying immigrants should be sent home or people shouldn't claim benefits or whatever, and like turning that into like a really key component of their identity as a politician makes them really successful. And Sunak has not done that. He's like, not even aware of what he's doing, which, speaks to the fact that he is, as you said, not a very good politician and will be remembered as such. I don't think he'll particularly mind, because he'll probably go on and make tons and tons of money and acquire status in many other ways. But here we are.
Yeah, I think it does probably have a lot to do with who they have, been in contact with, right? Because I suppose both Donald Trump and Nigel Farage, I think, and Boris Johnson as well, probably have met people from quite a lot of different walks of life, right? Donald Trump's spent a lot of time with lots of porn stars, right? Who don't tend to come from particularly privileged backgrounds. Boris Johnson does seem to be able to sort of socialize with any Tom, Dick, and Harry, right? So it does seem like Rishi Sunak is not only very posh, but he just hasn't met many people who aren't posh. And we saw that actually in that now infamous clip of him as a child. I can't remember why he was being interviewed, but it's from some sort of documentary or a news piece about his family. He's a schoolboy at the time. And he says, I've got all sorts of friends. I've got upper class, working class. Well, no, actually not working class. It's like, it's amazing. And that's how you end up with answers like this. Of course, the Skybox story, it was a farcical answer, but the story itself has become somewhat farcical. This was a tweet from a Sun journalist today. So she's called Martina Bett. Starmer tells me he certainly didn't have Sky TV growing up, and even a broken window couldn't be fixed promptly in his household. He adds, I am not pleading poverty, but I am just saying these are some of the issues that arise in a working class family. So Starmer certainly didn't have a Sky TV box. Of course, many were quick to point out online that Keir Starmer was born in 1962, and Sky TV wasn't launched until 1989, when Starmer was 26. So the Labour leader would have needed time travel, not richer parents, to enjoy the benefits, of a satellite dish in his childhood years. Grace, the clip, I was looking for that clip, and I feel like it wasn't actually videoed. It was just something he said to a journalist. In the clip he was given, he said, I'm going to leave it to Rishi Sunak to talk about what he didn't and didn't have as a child. But do you think Starmer seems wooden, but I actually think people have a better impression of him when it comes to sort of understanding ordinary people? What do you think?
I think when you look at the polling, most people say that they don't really feel as though they know anything about Starmer. So, I don't think they have necessarily made an impression of him. I think there was a while ago, they did a kind of word cloud of words that people associated with Starmer. And a lot of them were just kind of bland, boring, not sure. So in some senses, that's, I suppose, an asset. And I think this is really Labour's strategy. They're going up against a party that is imploding. And they think they can just kind of, do the Homer Simpson, go back into the bush and try and not put a foot wrong. And Starmer kind of epitomizes that, right? Because he hasn't done very much, if anything, to engage with voters and try and say, this is who I am as a politician. Admittedly, he hasn't failed and given a disastrous view of who he is as a politician, as Rishi Sunak has. But he just hasn't kind of really given people anything. I was also looking at some polling today that showed that people kind of vaguely trust Labour on a few things, so like dealing with the cost of living crisis, fixing the NHS, just because of the value of branding and its reputation. But they couldn't name any potential policies that Labour would have used to deal with any of those crises. Like the vast majority of people can't name a single policy that Labour is likely to implement. So I think there's this vague sense around Starmer, around Labour, that they can't be quite as bad as the Tories and he can't be quite as bad as Sunak. But people just don't really know what to expect from him. And maybe that's an asset given the kind of election that we're going into. But it's, I think not particularly inspiring. And it does mean that maybe, we see a bit of a surge in support for the Greens, and they do lose a couple of seats like Bristol Central. But really, I think the main thing is what it means for his policy agenda when he actually gets into power. Because the only thing we really know for sure at this point is that they are not spending any money.